Well, Alden Young is an associate professor of African Studies at the University of California in Los Angeles. He's also the author of the book Transforming Sudan. Thank you very much for joining us on the program. So is what's happening in Sudan right now perhaps an inevitable part of its transformation, that conflict between where it's come from and the direction the country is going in?
I think in many ways you're right. The conflict right now grew out of the transitional period. But I think it grows out of one of the failures of the transitional period, which has been to assert civilian control over Sudan's armed forces. And that's been a long struggle in Sudan, which has suffered a number of military coups and lately before 2019 and the fall of Omar al-Bashir, 30 years of military rule. So the struggle to bring Sudan's various military forces under civilian control is an ongoing struggle.
And is there a real threat to stability in the region now if this current ceasefire isn't successful? Is that the fear that many other countries have now?
I think it was a great initiative on the part of the United States and Saudi Arabia to finally implement a 72-hour ceasefire. And it took a lot of international mediation to get both the RSF and the Sudanese armed forces to agree. The Sudanese armed forces had seemed to be rather reluctant to agree to a ceasefire in the last few attempts. And I think now it's imperative that the ceasefire is extended. Because while the ceasefire will allow many foreign nationals and diplomats to evacuate the country, that isn't a solution for the vast majority of Sudanese people. And if there is no stability in Sudan, this conflict is already beginning to spread to Chad. Ethiopia is very unstable at the moment, and it puts additional economic pressure on Egypt and South Sudan just at a moment when they're least able to afford it.
And what could be the lasting damage to Sudan from this conflict, and particularly, as you say, for its people?
I think one of the great dangers is the resumption of civil war. Sudan has had many years of civil war in its post-colonial history. I think the vast majority of Sudan's post-colonial history since 1956 have actually had civil conflict. And it seems like we're on the verge of a return to a long and protracted civil war, which would be incredibly damaging to the Sudanese people, Sudanese society. And that war would likely be fought in Western Sudan and places like South Darfur that have only recently been able to return to some shaky peace. And so it would be a real damage. And this time, the conflict is in the heart of Khartoum, in areas that rarely have suffered as much as they've suffered now. But it's going to take a huge international investment to rebuild Sudan's infrastructure, its hospitals, its water supply. And so I think this has already been incredibly damaging for Sudan.
And how difficult is it for people there right now in terms of food, water, and even general medical supplies?
I think the situation is very difficult for people who have medical conditions in Sudan, even very treatable medical conditions. They're not able to get adequate medical care. Much of the water system in Khartoum has been destroyed, Khartoum and Omdurman and Bahri, and that will take a long time to recover. Many people are fleeing the city to go to areas in the countryside that are better able to support them, but those areas lack critical infrastructure. And even the most privileged people in the country, foreign diplomats and others, have had to take on road journeys of 24 to 36 hours to get to places like Port Sudan or the Ethiopian or Egyptian borders. And not that many people can make those journeys. Bus rides are costing upwards of $500 to the Egyptian border. And so it's very, very difficult for the vast majority of Sudanese people right now.
Okay, Alden Young, thank you very much for joining us on the programme. That's Alden Young, the Associate Professor of African Studies at the University of California, Los Angeles.